Hello, my name is Marshall Williamson, and today I would like to discuss global warming. When I am done with my speech, what I would like you to understand is what global warming means to me, what it means to you, basically what it means to all of us. Warming. Let's first discuss what is global warming. A lot that has come into question a lot lately due to the fact that things are changing in our world and people want to know why. Well, the simple answer of global warming is global warming, or it is also known as climate change, is a change in the Earth's climate from one extreme to, well, not from extreme, from one part to another. Basically, it is saying that the Earth has become warmer over the past few decades, and it has become noticeably warmer, which is also what we consider climate change. Climate change is when, say, the climate will go from warm to hot, cool to warm, vice versa. So, uh, a wet area can become a dry area can become a wet area. That's called climate change, which in turn is also called global warming. Now, this is global warming is a worldwide threat. I'm use the word threat because that's what it basically is. It is a threat, and it needs to be taken seriously. Unfortunately, there is a lot of conjecture out there now between scientists and other people discussing global warming as a myth. Is it true? Is it even anything that we need to be considered about? Well, there are two ways of looking at that. Number one, is the evidence is there to show us that global warming is real. We have noted that since the industrial age, the temperature of the Earth has risen significantly and a lot more than has ever been in the history of, well, in recorded history is the best way to put it. And we know this from the ice cores that we have taken from the Antarctic and from the tree rings that we have also gathered from around the world. Now, you may ask, why am I talking about ice rings or ice cores and tree rings? Well, ice cores are basically footprints of time. What it does is the ice sits, in the Antarctic or Arctic, depending on where you are, and it doesn't go anywhere. It basically just sits there. It doesn't freeze. It doesn't melt. It doesn't disappear. It's constantly there. So, in time, as more and more snow and ice develops on top of this, what happens is the ice that was there at that time captures the gases and what's going on in the atmosphere and basically makes a record of it on itself. It's imprinting basically what the climate was at that time upon itself. And as I say, it gets pushed down further and further as time elapses and more ice grows on top of it. Well, we can dig down to these cores, and determining the depths, we can determine what the time period was and what the temperature was at that time. Same with tree rings. By the growth of them, we can determine if the climate was hot or if it was cold at a certain period of time. So, by following these, we have noticed that the climate has risen significantly just by following these examples. Now, with all this taken into account, there is still conjecture about, well, how can the Earth be getting warmer if our winters are getting colder and it seems like, the summers aren't really getting that hot anymore? Well, global warming can cause a global cooling. I know that may sound ridiculous, but let me explain. When global warming happens, what goes on is as the Earth becomes warmer, the polar ice caps, which are on the top of the Earth and the bottom of the Earth, quick geography lesson, begin to melt. Now, these are made of fresh water. Now, this fresh water then gets dumped into the oceans. Now, what happens? The oceans and their currents are made up of a delicate balance of warm water, cool water, and the salinization that goes along with it. Basically, to explain it, it's the North Atlantic Current. For those of you who do not know what that is, I'll give you a brief explanation. The North Atlantic Current is the current that comes up from the Gulf of Mexico. Now, what it does is it brings the warm waters up from the Gulf and it brings it up along the Atlantic seaboard. In doing so, this warm water then makes a temperate climate along the Atlantic seaboard, keeping it nice and warm the way that we like it here in America. Now, as this reaches the top of the North America, it makes a turn and begins to head over towards Europe, uh, over crossing underneath Greenland. As it does this, the water becomes cooler. As the water becomes cooler, it's created like a steam effect. Basically, when warm water hits cooler water, it becomes steam. What this steam effect does is then the winds push this steam effect, not basically all steam, but the steam effect towards Europe, and then this in turn keeps Europe and gives it its temperate climate, such as Britain, United Kingdom, and France and stuff like that. People always wonder why it's always foggy and stuff like that there. Well, this is why, because this steam then comes over and keeps that part of the continent from freezing. Now, the greatest example of this happened in what was called the Little Ice Age, a period during the 1600s when a very large lake in North America had broken loose due to an earthquake and flowed into the Atlantic. This, in turn, disrupted the transatlantic current. When this happened, the warm waters, which then came up to flow over and keep the Europe warm, were stopped basically in their tracks, and they didn't make it. So what happened was during that time it was called the Little Ice Age because Europe basically had no summers for over a century, and the temperatures were way below normal. This came from the desalinization. At the time, they didn't realize what it was, but this is what it was because that current had stopped flowing. Now, it would take a very large amount of glacier melting to do this nowadays, but it is possible, as we see, because with global warming, now getting back to the main part I was talking about, the more that the ice caps melt, the more of the ocean water is exposed to the sun. With this bare ocean water, to be blunt, exposed to the sun, it absorbs more heat. The more heat it absorbs, the warmer it becomes, which in turn goes against the ice caps and causes them to melt more, thereby shrinking them, thereby showing more ocean. And it's basically just, to put it in layman's terms, a snowball effect where it just keeps building and building and building, therefore dumping more and more water. Now, not to say that this could cause another ice age, but it is very possible, and we really don't want that to happen. The main things we need to be concerned about is that the global temperature rising as it is not a good thing, even though people might say, oh, it'd be nice to stay warmer all the time and the winters won't be as bad. Well, the bad side of that is, with it being warmer all the time and the winters not being that bad, excuse me, this would lead into increased drought situations. This would lead to increased sea levels in places like Florida. Florida would basically be underwater. To put it blankly, it's a swamp as it is, and it is below sea level. Florida would basically no longer be beachfront property; it would be underneath the beach. Texas and parts of Louisiana, as we learned with Katrina, that would be New Orleans. Basically, would be just a big bowl of water, which it already is, which is just a bowl as it is anyway. But with the sea levels rising, there would be no way to contain that, and New Orleans would just be filled with water, and that would be over. Most of California would go underwater, and it would not be a good thing no matter how you look at it. There would be increased droughts with the temperatures on the rise, as there are many places in California up until recently have not had any significant rainfall at all for years, as far as they can remember back, and that is not a good thing for that to continue. With global warming, this would continue and only increase. Places where famine is, that would only get worse, and places that have too much water would basically have way more water than they could ever handle. So global warming on the mass is not a good thing. Not to mention that the animals such as polar bears, penguins, seals, which depend on their living conditions in the Arctic for their survival. Their conditions have deteriorated massively since this global warming has begun, to the point of where most of them are endangered species, which is a shame that in this day and age that us as humans, with all our technology, would even let any animal species go extinct. But that's a whole different story. Now, what we can do to stop global warming is, one person cannot do it all alone. I know that, and hopefully anybody out there would realize that. But we can all do our part by reducing what we use, reusing things instead of just throwing them away, and most of all, recycling. We can prevent landfills from filling up. Thereby, this would cut down on methane gas also, which is also a contributor to the greenhouse gas. Either one of these things alone by one person Does not seem like a lot, but if we all would take the time to do it, take care of our planet, let our children have something that they can grow up with, let them have trees, let them grow up the way we did with a planet that is sustainable for us and many generations to come. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation on global warming.